And so we're going to take a look at the second part of chapter 42 and now really take what we've been talking about in the cardiovascular system and apply it to the actual gas exchange itself. And so really tie it into its connection to our respiratory system. So when we're talking about gas exchange overall, we're looking at these gases, the uptake of the oxygen for the cellular respiration from the environment, and the disposal of the CO2 from that process. Now, that being said, don't confuse this level of gas exchange with cellular respiration themselves, although there's definitely a connection. We're talking about moving the oxygen that we need for cellular respiration through that respiratory media, through the circulatory system to get to the cellular level and actually be able to be present for cellular respiration. And then the reverse also being true, that cellular respiration producing that CO2 as a byproduct, and then we need to move it back out of the cell into the circulatory system, into that respiratory media to then actually get it out of the body of that organism as well. So these gases diffuse via diffusion. So going from a region of high to low, we generally talk about passive transport, high to low concentration. But when we're talking about gases, it's technically not concentration, although you can think of it that way. What we're really talking about with gases is pressure. So when we talk about gases diffusing, we're talking about diffusing from high partial pressures to low partial pressures. And all partial pressure really is the pressure that gas is exerting on a particular gas in a mixture of those gases. So just like we would traditionally move from high to low concentration, the gases will move from high to low pressure gradients in the lungs as well as in the organs that they're present in. So when we look at this idea of respiratory media, and we talk about animals who do this sort of respiratory process, this gas exchange process, animals are either going to use air or water as their source of oxygen. So what does this mean in terms of evolutionary standpoint? Well, they have to have certain structures to allow that exchange to occur with their environment. So something to keep in mind as we talk through some of the exchange structures that exist in animals is that in a given volume, there's actually less oxygen available in water than there is air. So the efficiency of a water system, a water exchange system, is going to have to be considerably higher than what we talk about trying to get that oxygen out of the air. Okay. So animals in general require these large, moist respiratory surfaces to exchange gases between their cells and either that air or water respiratory media, whatever the case might be given that organism. So that gas exchange needs to occur via diffusion across that surface. Now, when we talk about getting that oxygen into that area where that gas exchange can take place, we're really talking about ventilation. So moving that respiratory media, whether it's air or water, over that respiratory surface so that we can allow for that exchange via diffusion to occur. And that ventilation piece can happen and vary from animal to animal. We could talk about it happening across skin in things like frogs. Fish have gills. We have the sort of trachea and lungs set up. So there's definitely lots of options when you look through the evolutionary progression through different organisms of this respiratory surface. So if we take a look at something like the gills, and even here there are variations in the system. So when we talk about gills specifically, they're these outfoldings of the body. And their job is to create lots and lots of surface area so that we can engage in that gas exchange. And we're talking aquatic organisms, which means that we're taking that oxygen out of the water. And remember, we just said that the exchange rate or the efficiency of pulling oxygen out of the water is considerably lower than pulling it out of the air. So the more surface area we can increase, the more efficient the system can be. All right. So these guys sort of have pseudogills. They'll act like that. And here's what that gill system looks like Here's something in your crayfish, right? You've got all these foldings to increase surface area. Sea stars also have a unique system as well. Look at your fish, and here you can see even more gill filaments really pumping full of all of these blood vessels so that we can allow for that gas exchange to occur. Now, in aquatic organisms, their gills work via what they call a counter current exchange system. So as water is flowing one direction, the blood's sort of flowing the opposite. So we're countering the pressures, and that's what you're seeing here. So I'm going to move that blood from one side to the other. Water's moving across it in the opposite direction so that we can counterbalance and pull that oxygen more efficiently. So here's your net diffusion of water, oxygen more efficiently as they run past each other. Okay, and that blood always has to be less saturated with oxygen than the water in order for it to effectively be able to pull that oxygen out of the water and into the organism itself. You can have straight tracheal systems like our cute little grasshopper here, all right, where, remember, these guys have an open circulatory system, so their system's also a little different in terms of gas exchange with their environment. And those tracheal systems have these external openings, which is what you're seeing here sort of zoomed in. And so that air is able to come through here. They'll have these little tracheoles, and that's going to feed directly to their body cells. So that tracheal system doesn't really go through a true normal set of lungs like we'd think about, although they've got air sacs here to help with the air differential, pressure differential, so that they can actually get the oxygen, get the air into their body. But there is no real circulatory system transporting those gases. It's all going directly from these tracheal setups directly to their body cells. Now, larger insects need ventilation in those tracheal systems in order to meet those oxygen demands. So bigger you are, the more beefed up this system is. And then we can talk about true traditional lungs like most kids would think about when we talk about respiratory systems. And again, still infoldings of the body surface, just like those gills kind of are, but rather than being outside, they're all internal. So your circulatory system, whether it's open or closed, can utilize lungs. They don't necessarily have to be one versus the other, but the idea here is that they're going to transport those gases from the lungs to the rest of their body. And we can talk size and complexity of those lungs being corresponding to an animal's metabolic rate. So remember, we need the oxygen ultimately to get to those cells to do the chemical reactions that are part of that cellular respiration process, which is a metabolic pathway. And then we've got to get rid of the CO2. So the more metabolic demand that an organism has, the more we need respiratory surface in order to move those gases in and out efficiently when we talk about that exchange with the environment itself.